Okay, so we'll get started. Thank you for coming. My name's Frank Shipley from Componize. Today I'll be talking to you about data release management. The complete title is actually We've Still Got a Lot to Learn. So I feel like there's still a lot that we can learn about release management in the information development world. And there's probably a lot that we can learn from the software development world. Since I come from software, I thought I'd share some of the software tools and ideas that we use in software development that we could apply to information development. So I'm going to give my presentation. So we'll analyze, or try and analyze this problem of data release management, and we'll identify 3 principal use cases, and then we'll look at those 3 use cases in more detail. And then we'll look how we could probably apply software release management sort of processes to DITA and our documentation. Then I'll do a demo, and then conclusion at the end, and hopefully plenty of time for questions. So the problem analysed. So basically this is just some research I did on the internet, reading through white papers that people have written in, about release management in the DITA community, some blog posts and things. Basically all the information I could find about DITA release management. Don't expect you to read that. Basically these are some of the terms that came out time and time again. You can look at the slides afterwards. The sources that I use mainly are listed on the bottom here. So the CIDM website, white papers, presentations, blog posts, etc. And basically I identified 3 main themes. So the problems that people were faced with when they were trying to manage releases was managing multiple versions in parallel. So basically when you've got several versions, or you're documenting several versions of a product, and you need to maintain those versions over time. Okay, so that's quite a typical example. The second main theme was multiple variants. So where you might have a product but several product variants. Okay, and you need to manage the release for those different variants. And then the third one was when you have multiple release cycles. Okay, so people are doing more and more agile development processes where the release cycles are more and more rapid and quite often overlapping. So those were the 3 main themes that came out. Okay, and what we're going to do is look at those 3 use cases in more detail. Okay, so the first one was managing versions in parallel. So this is fairly typical. So you've got your documentation, you've documented the version 1 of a product, and then later on in time, you're working on version 2, say, but then there's a bug in the product and you need to go back and update your documentation with that bug fixed. So then what you probably do is you branch, or you create a copy of your documents so that you can update that topic for version 1. Okay, maybe you call it 1.1, okay, but like a maintenance release. And then later on in time, just before you're ready for the 2.0 release, you'll probably merge those changes back into 2.0, and then you do the 2.0 release. Okay, you needed to create that branch because this content here didn't apply to 1.0. Okay, so you had to create a branch, a temporary branch, make the changes for 1.0, you release that as 1.1, and then you re-merged it back into the main branch before the 2.0 release. Okay, if you think you might have to maintain that branch over time, or that 1.0 version over time, then you might decide to keep that branch. Okay, sometimes we call that a release branch. Okay, so a good solution for managing and work in parallel on different versions, where you need to maintain several versions over time, is simply to use branching and merging, okay, which is a technique that most people talk about when they talk about data release management, or release management in general. So then you've got the multiple variants use case. So this is where you're managing several products, or documentation of several products, and you've got some shared content maybe between those products. So there's an initial release, and then later on in time you're working on product 1. So you've updated this shared topic for product 1, but then you find out that you also need to update that shared topic for product 2. Okay, but the changes aren't compatible with the ones that you've got in product 1. So you might need to create a copy or a new branch so that you can make those changes for product 2. Okay, then that's just so that probably people can work together in parallel, okay, on the same topics without overwriting each other's work. Then ideal case, ideal scenario, you'd be able to merge those changes into a unique topic. Okay, though, so that that topic would work for both product 1 or for product 2. So branching would allow you to work in parallel on multiple variants, okay, of a product or a topic. Okay, branching may not be the best solution because you might not be able to merge. Okay, if you can't merge, then you've just got another copy of the topic, and you might not want to manually manage those different variants or those different copies. And if you can't merge those changes, then you'll have to keep that product branch for the lifetime of that product variant. Okay, and do you really want to manage a copy, an extra copy of your documents? So branching, merging is not a good solution for this. It lets you get the work done, but you might have to maintain several branches in parallel for a long time if you can't merge. So it's probably not the best solution. Branching and merging is probably not the best solution for this scenario. Okay, then the third scenario was multiple release cycles. So again, same example. We've got two products that share some content, a topic. Okay, we're working on product 1. Okay, we need to release product 1. Okay, first. But at the same time, we need to start work on product 2, okay, which is going to be released later. Okay, but I don't want the changes that I'm going to do for product 2 for the later release to go into my early release. Okay, so again, we're going to have to branch to work on these different products on this shared content at the same time. Okay, so we've separated out the changes that we're making for product 2 for that later release. And we're concentrating on this V2 release for product 1, so we can do that. And then at a later date, once that release is done, we can merge in these changes, okay, if they're compatible, and then we can do the V2 release for product 2. Okay, so you can manage that with branching and merging. Okay, you can work in parallel on multiple releases. It's one possible solution, okay, but it's probably not the best solution. So the question here is what other solutions are there? Well, this just resumes those 3 use cases. Okay, I hope I've identified the 3 main use cases. There might be some others. So later on, if some of the use cases come to mind, then we can talk about them during the Q&A. So I would say that for the first use case, branching is the best solution. If you're managing several versions in parallel. For the multiple variants, I think it depends what your variants are. I think you need to be inventive and you need to come up with your own solution for your own requirements. Okay, there's not one best solution here, but it's definitely not branching. Okay, branching is probably a solution, probably not the best. Okay, so yeah, if you can think, we can talk about this during the Q&A maybe. And then for the third one, which is the one that I'm going to focus on. Okay, so when you've got multiple release cycles. Okay, in some ways I think this is probably the hardest one that can be solved easily. Yeah, so the greatest benefit with the least effort. Okay, so let's concentrate our efforts here. Okay, so if we were to apply a branching scenario to this multiple release cycles example, okay, this is just an example. Say we have 3 versions of our product at any one time. We've got the current version that we're working on. Okay, that's the one that's going to be released in the near future. We have the current production release that's out there, and we might be maintaining 1 or more previous releases. So you're going to have 3 versions to manage, aren't you? At minimum. Okay, so you'll have 3 branches. Then if you have 2 products, okay, it's a very simple use case, isn't it? But these products have a different release date. Yeah, product 1 is released in Q1, product 2 in Q2. So what does that mean? Well, if we've got any shared content, which we probably have if we're doing DITA, then we'll probably have to have a branch for each one of those products, won't we? And if we're managing several versions of those products, then, well, at best we're going to have 3 branches if we can do this, manage these releases on a single branch. But if we have to manage them with branching, then we're going to have to duplicate that, aren't we? So worst case is probably we're going to end up with 6 branches. and then the effort to merge them and everything. Okay, so that could be quite a lot of effort, quite a lot of overhead for managing those, just because they've got a different release cycle. Okay, that's the only problem here. Yeah, and we're like doubling the number of branches just because they're being released at a different time. Okay, so I've got an alternative solution. So this alternative solution is what we've been using in software for decades. Okay, so why don't we use it as well? And hopefully you'll agree with me. Okay, so the idea here is that shared content, we split it out into a separate project, which has its own release cycle. Okay, so we take the same example as before, product 1, product 2 with some shared content. Okay, that was released 1.0, and then from now on, okay, we've got product 1 that we need to release in November. And product 2 is going to be released in December. Okay, and they both share a topic. Okay, but the changes that we're going to put into the November release, or into the December release, I can't put them into the November release. Okay, so what you do, that shared topic that we had here, you put it into a separate project. So a separate repository, if you like. Using Subversion, you put it into another project in Subversion, or Git, another project in Git. So it's up there on its own. So we can work on that separate project. It's a bit like a shared library in software development. It's got some reusable components that we can use in our software applications. Yeah, reusable content that we can use in our documents, yeah, products. So let's make the November changes there, and we'll call that V2. And we release V2. Okay, so that's got all the changes that we need for November. And then it's got its own release cycle. So the people who are working on that project, they know that they've got some extra updates to do for the December release. So they can work on those changes. And then at a later date, they'll release a V3, okay, with those December changes. So when we need to do the product 1 release, what we do is we say, okay, I need to use that shared content. Okay, so we say this project here needs to import the content from that other project. Okay, and we can say this has a dependency on that project. Okay, so product 1 will use V2 of that shared project. And then we can release the V2 of that product 1. And then later on, for the product 2 release, well, we're just going to update the dependency here and say that, okay, now we can switch over to this V3 version because now we're going to publish product 2. And the product 2 version will use that V3 version of the shared content. Okay, so the idea is you put shared content into a separate shared project which has its own life cycle or release cycle. The main project has a dependency on the shared project. Okay, and there's no branching and no merging, is there? So I'm sure it's exactly the same in the industry, any industry, like a car. You break it down into components, don't you? Maybe the components, they each have their own life cycle. The engine has its own life cycle, which might be independent from the car. And the engine's got its own roadmap and features they're going to add to the engine. And then at some point in time, you're going to say, okay, this car's going to use this engine. So you might do that with your documentation, and we do that with software as well. Okay, so is branch and merge the answer to DITA release management? So I think it is for managing multiple versions in parallel. Okay, if you need to maintain several versions, previous versions, maintenance releases, then yes. Okay, if you're managing multiple product variants or products that have multiple release cycles or different release cycles, then it's probably not the best solution. You're just going to be multiplying the number of branches and the overhead of actually merging those branches. Okay, so multi-branch or multi-project. So we branch multiple versions, or if we need to work in parallel for any reason on something, a team needs to work on something in isolation without bothering another team, you could create a branch for that. And when to split into multiple projects? Well, when you've got shared content between products that have different release cycles. You get other advantages as well. If you have dependencies on external artifacts, okay, then you can split up into multiple projects. Okay, you can bring in content from other teams, for example.
And you can also work in parallel with the second way in multi-project. I mean, you also get the benefit
Yeah.
I mean, the benefits.
Oh
of
yeah, you can.
returns,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not exclusive.
No, it's not exclusive. Yeah. It's what we do in software all the time, isn't it? Okay, is this better off in a separate project? Has it got its own life cycle? Is there a specific team working on this content? And if so, well, it's better off in a separate project. Okay, so software release management applied to DITA. Okay, so we do this in software all the time. So what can we learn from the software world that we can actually take and apply to DITA? Okay, so first thing to note is the difference between release management and configuration management. I think quite often in the DITA world, when we think of release management, we think of configuration management. It's straight away, it's branch merge. Yeah. So configuration management, that's only part of the actual release management process. The release management process is not just managing your source content, it's managing the complete process from source content to end product. Okay, and how that source content gets integrated with other artifacts, other content that might come in from different teams, different sources, how it all gets integrated together, QA'd, and then out into production. Okay, so it's the whole process. So there are three parts to this puzzle. There's the version control system, that's where you store your source files, an artifact repository, which is where you store the actual output from those projects. It can then be shared between teams, and then a server that's going to manage all the build process, which we call a continuous integration server. Okay, so for the version control really is just about being able to go back, yeah, reversibility. Okay, I took this quote from Eric Raymond, a paper that he wrote about it. Concurrency, so the version control system lets you work in parallel, either through working copies or by creating branches. And annotation, so you've got like an audit trail of who did what when. Okay, that's what the version control system provides. Okay, in the DITA world, it's probably your CMS that provides those, or you might be using Subversion, Git or something else. Okay, then the next bit, then for the branching bit, because we tend to think of branching as like release management, these are just some of the strategies that we use in the software world that you could probably apply to documentation as well. So you tend to have like this development branch. Okay, that's your main branch. Sometimes it's called trunk, sometimes it's called master. So that's your latest development version of the code. And this has got an infinite lifetime, so it like goes on forever. And these are updates, yeah, commits along that timeline. Okay, then you probably have release branches. Okay, so whenever this code here or this content here is ready for release, okay, you can release it, so your V1 release. And then you carry on working, and then there's a bug that's identified in that V1 release. So you might update that on the release branch, okay, and then you might do a 1.1 maintenance release, and then because that also applies to your latest version, well, you probably merge that back into your development branch. And then later on, you get to a point where you want to do the V2 release. You do the V2 release, and then while you're doing QA, you might find some last-minute bugs. You fix them here, then when that 2.0 release is finished, you merge those bug fixes back into your development branch. So that's the sort of thing that we apply in software development, and you can do that with the documentation as well. We also have things that we call feature branch, which is like to help people work in parallel. So maybe this team is working on a big change, yeah, which like updates, affects a lot of documents. So we don't want this trunk branch to become unstable. So these guys go off and they're doing their work on their own, and when they're ready, then they'll commit those changes back into trunk, and then they can go out to the 2.1 release, sorry, the 2.0 release. Call those feature branches. Okay, so that was the first part. That's the VCS part, version control. Okay, so the next part, which is what I think is the most interesting, and that's for that third scenario, is all about artifacts and repositories. Okay, we said we should split out that shared content into a separate project, and we should put a dependency between the main project and the sub-project. But then the question is, okay, how do we define that dependency, and how do we make those sub-project artifacts available to the main project? Okay, so we do that by packaging up our source files, okay, into a zip file. In the software industry, we use a jar file, and we store that in a repository in some place, so that people can then access it easily. Okay, so in the DITA world, this could just simply be a zip of your DITA source files. Okay, it'd be nice to have a standard format, and in fact, Elliot Kimber started a project, I think it was 2008, wasn't it?
Some time ago,
Yeah, to define like a standard archive format or zip format for exchanging DITA source files. Okay, and the project's called DITA Interchange Project. Yeah, DXP. It's on SourceForge. So that's a great idea for having a standard zip format or interchange format if you need to interchange your DITA source files, either with other teams internally or with other companies or other departments. So now I'm working on that. I'll probably work with Elliot on that. First thing I'm going to do is adopt his format, and then we'll see if it can become generalized.
It's very, the format's very simple, and I'll mention that the latest Oxygen, their export DITA map.
Yeah.
If you click the checkbox that says pages of zip,
It just exports to your DXP. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, just by pure accident.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So if it happens by accident, it's even better. Nothing to do.
But yeah. Not
Yeah.
entirely an accident, because I assigned DXP to,
Yeah.
so
And it's compatible with, it's just a zip, so it works with everything. Yeah. So it's dead easy to exchange files with the people. So you've got your artifacts. You could just put them on a shared drive, couldn't you? You could send them by email or Facebook or whatever. But why don't we put them in an artifact repository? Okay, so there are these things, these artifact repositories, which exist already in the software world. And that's a great way for sharing artifacts. I'll give you a demo. Okay, so why don't we store our DITA artifacts in the artifact repository? Okay, so the other thing we need to be able to do, once we've got these artifacts, is define dependencies between them. So I need to be able to say my project needs that content from that shared project. So I've got a dependency on that shared project. Okay, so you might also have cases as well where you have a project that depends on another project, that depends on another project, it depends on another project. So we call those transient dependencies. Okay, so there are software that actually manage these dependencies and transient dependencies. There's a few examples here. I'll be showing you an example in a few moments. So I think we could manage dependencies in the same way, and artifacts. Okay, so you can imagine that the basic idea here is that you've got groups of people in your company working on content. They're producing these artifacts, this content, storing them locally in an artifact repository. Okay, obviously you need something that can actually package those things for you, so maybe some sort of build server. Okay, and then, well, why not, if you've got a partner company or another group working in another location or even another company, customer, okay, if they did things the same way, they could package up their artifacts, store them on an artifact repository, and then you could exchange those artifacts via the network, and then you could even open it up to the whole internet, okay, which is what we do with software. Okay, just a quick word. Generally, artifacts, we have two types, like released artifacts, and you know they're the final version, they won't change, and then snapshot artifacts, which is like a work in progress. So you can share snapshot artifacts while you're working on something, and then once it's been finalized, then that becomes a release artifact. You can cache a released artifact because you know it's not going to change. Snapshot artifacts need to be updated. Okay, then the last piece of the puzzle before we get to the demo is the continuous integration. Okay, that was the little server at the bottom there that did all the packaging, okay, and actually integrated your software with the software that comes from other departments or from other projects. It brings it all together. Okay, so the primary goal of this, of continuous integration, detect integration problems, particularly if you're integrating a lot of artifacts from different sources, yeah, that might change over time, and to do automated testing, regression testing. So there are several tools available. So Roger did a presentation yesterday about continuous integration. Okay, we went into continuous integration, these solutions in a lot more detail. So if you'd like to know more about that, then it would be good if you look at his presentation slides, and then, well, we can talk about it more afterwards, can't we? Okay, so demo, that's what you're all here for anyways. So I'm just going to give you a big demo of that third solution. So the basic idea is that we've got, and then afterwards we'll do questions. So the basic idea is that we've got this, we've got two products that share some content. And what we're going to do is we're going to share that Is that working okay?
Maybe you should resize.
Oh yeah, I'm going to resize the screen. Yeah. So, maybe resize the screen. Hang on, let me just do a. Do F11, is that me?
Yep.
Yeah. Unless it goes off to the side. Never mind. Okay, we could probably see, yeah. Okay, so if you've got two products like this, you might have your files organized in this way. So you've got two DITA maps, you've got your topics stored in a topic folder. Okay, and let's say that we've got some topics that are specific to each product here. And then you might have some shared content that you share frequently in a separate folder. Okay, that's got your shared content. So basically what I'm saying is that if these products have got different release cycles, then it's probably good practice to split that shared content up into a separate project. Okay, so what I would suggest is that instead of having them all in one project, let's have a separate project for the shared content. And even, why don't we go as far as splitting up each project into a separate, that's a pain actually, the thing that goes off the screen, into a separate project. Can you see here? So can you see at the side here, look, instead of storing everything in one place, I've got three folders, basically three projects. We've got the content for my product 1 in project 1, content for product 2 in project 2, and the shared content in this shared project. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is, let's just have a look at this shared content here. Okay, so here I'm in Oxygen, I've got the same folders open here. So my shared topic is just, you see that? It's just very simple, isn't it? Shared topic for the initial release. Okay. So in order for this to work, so we've integrated an artifact repository support into Componize, and it's a standard open API that works with different types of artifact repository. The example that I'm going to use here is Maven, okay, which is one of the most popular ones. So if I want to be able to share this artifact with others, I need to give it a name. I need to identify it. Okay, so this is how Maven does it.